Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. Improving strength and gaining muscle is critical for our overall health and function. And our strength and muscle mass are two of the greatest predictors of longevity. For these reasons, everyone is wondering, how do I get stronger and gain muscle in the most efficient and practical and reliable ways? Whether you're brand new to strength training or you're a muscle-bound weightlifting maniac, this episode is for you. We're going to cut through the hype and misinformation to give you some practical tips and knowledge so you can become your strongest self. Our session is titled, How to Build Muscle and Get Stronger, What Everyone Needs to Know and Do. Our expert guest here to help us with this is a good friend of mine, Eric Cressey. Eric is the president and co-founder of Cressey Sports Performance with facilities in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida and Hudson, Massachusetts. Eric has worked with clients from youth sports to the professional and Olympic ranks, but is best known for his extensive work with baseball players. More than 100 professional players train at CSP each offseason. He also serves as the New York Yankees Director of Player Health and Performance, overseeing strength and conditioning and nutrition for the organization. Eric has authored over 1,000 articles, published 6 books, and co-created 7 video resources that have been sold in over 60 countries around the world. Eric has lectured in 6 countries and more than 25 U.S. states, and his research has been published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. Eric publishes a free blog and newsletter at his website, ericcressey.com, and he's the host of the Elite Baseball Podcast. He has a wealth of experience, and we're looking forward to sitting down with him today. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out to help us sort through this.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor, and I'm excited to chat.
All right. So to keep us organized, we're going to break this down into 3 sections, and we have a themed question for each one of those sections. So the big question for our first section is going to be, what is meant by strength training and why is it so important for us? And then in the second section, we'll talk a little bit about why this is hard. So why do so many of us struggle to work out regularly and gain muscle? And then in the last one, we're hoping you'll give us some answers and solutions here. And the big question there is, what are the core practices that everyone should incorporate to build muscle and get stronger? So I know that's a lot, but I think you're up for it. You ready? All right. So we'll dive into this first section. We're just going to talk about some definitions and what strength training actually is and why it's important. So as a professional who does this at a high level for a lot of people, how do you personally define strength?
So I think strength, very simply, is the ability to produce force. At its absolute foundational definition. I think the tricky thing about it is force is very skill specific, right? So if I decide I want to become a professional arm wrestler, I get really good at one thing, right? But if I want to go play, I want to be a Olympic wrestler, right? I have to be strong in a lot of different positions, and there's a lot of research on balance and proprioception that shows that it's really skill specific. So I think it's really hard just to say one person is strong, because strong is always going to be relative to the context that they're engaged in. You might see someone who's really strong as a hiker, but not strong as a hockey player. So you just have to appreciate what the training goal is and then define it from there.
And that really applies to athletes as well as regular people, right? So obviously a baseball player is going to train differently than a football player. And even within a sport, a quarterback's going to train differently than a linebacker and et cetera. I think that's also true for us as regular human beings. So are you somebody who's maybe you're not a professional athlete, but are you trying to run Ironmans, or do Ironman triathlons, or are you somebody who's just playing pickup basketball with your friends, or trying to not injure your shoulder while playing golf? So you got to sort of figure out what your own profile and goals are going to be, which I think is important. One of the things I think that can often get confusing is this concept of muscle mass versus strength. I know the two are correlated, but they're not exactly the same thing. So can you help clarify those terms for us?
Yeah, so for sure. I think the first thing I would say is, like, when we talk about strength training, right? Yeah, we're producing force. Strength can be resistance against like a classic barbell or dumbbell, right? It could be kettlebells, but it could also be body weight resistance. It could be bands. It could be a number of different ways to actually challenge your muscular system and really your tendons, your ligaments, all those different things work together to produce force, right? Your fascial system, which is probably a whole other podcast for another time. But big picture, what we're trying to do is we're trying to drive two pathways to making people stronger. And the one I think everybody knows about is that all things considered, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, right? So if we go and we do a bunch of exercise that's new to us, everyone knows that feeling, the next morning or, for 24 to 36 hours later where you're very sore, right? And what that is it's just microscopic tears. It's trauma to the muscles that they've been exposed to with that new initiative. And so what really happens is when that happens, you create this big inflammatory response. All these satellite cells are recruited to the area, and they basically rebuild that tissue stronger than it previously was, right? So all that makes perfect sense. And how big that muscle gets is dependent on nutrition and sleep and genetics and all these factors. But what a lot of people lose sight of is that really it's neural adaptation. So it's the ability for your brain, your spinal cord, your peripheral nerves to kind of communicate with muscles to teach them how to fire. So the way that I always actually describe this to people is if you take a brand new beginning exerciser, so take a 14-year-old kid who's never stepped foot in a weight room, and let's say you have him do a dumbbell bench press with 15 pounds in each hand, right? And they're wobbling all over the place. Their feet are getting squirrely. They bang out 6 or 7 reps. And on the eighth rep, they just absolutely staple to the bench. It doesn't go anywhere. You help it back up on them. And then they go and they bang out 2 or 3 more reps. It makes no sense, right? That doesn't happen in advanced lifters who are very, very kind of neurally efficient. They're good at recruiting those fibers. And what that's called, it's called asynchronous recruitment, where they basically kind of turn on and turn off these slow twitch muscle fibers that we kind of hear about in the media. What happens over the course of time with training, we get more efficient at recruiting the big muscle fibers, the really, really strong ones to do these hard jobs. We still get those low key kind of slow twitch fibers. And then at the same time, we actually learn to turn off the opposing muscle. So if I'm trying to do a biceps curl, my triceps has to relax to take place. So there's all these neurological things that are taking place as we're trying to get stronger. So a bigger muscle is stronger, but also one that's more finely tuned is, and where that's really important for the people that are listening to this is when you take a beginning exerciser, someone who's never done anything, the research shows you can get strong on as little as 40% of your 1 rep max. So if you're someone that, if you want to hop right under a barbell and squat really heavy and you could squat, say 150 pounds, like you can really use 60 pounds on that barbell and you can go through picture perfect technique. And meanwhile, your body's just learning to sync everything up. So you're actually getting stronger, even if the muscles themselves aren't getting big. And that's why it's so important to train correctly as a beginner. You don't want to just like load up like crazy and, develop really bad habits. You want to just use enough resistance to create that adaptation.
So this is not just about making your muscles bigger, but it's also teaching them how to function appropriately. And I would think for most of us that are doing this for lifestyle applications, that I want to be able to, go on a hike with my kids, or I want to be able to help a buddy move the couch without getting injured, or I want to play a pickup game of basketball, that using the muscles in the right way is going to be just as critical as the size of those muscles.
Huge. That efficiency that you're developing protects you when you slip on the ice in a cold Minnesota winter, right?
Mhm.
It's the same thing that helps you hold a fidgeting grandkid when you're in your 80s and you just want to take care of someone who's squirmy at an amusement park. Like all those things just make you more prepared for
Yeah.
everything that life can throw at you.
Great. You highlighted this a little bit earlier, that there are some other factors that influence how we gain strength. So if you and I both went in and we did the exact same workout with the exact same weight and we followed it for a long period of time, your body's going to respond a little bit differently than mine does, and we'll get slightly different results because there's multiple factors at play here that determine how we gain strength and how we gain muscle. So you mentioned a few of them earlier with diet and sleep. What are maybe you can go into a little more detail about those and some other factors that influence our body's ability to gain muscle beyond just the weight we're lifting itself.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the first thing, it's hard to overlook genetics. Like certain people are more wired to put on muscle mass quickly. You know, obviously, I think those differences become less profound as we age, right? If you take two 70-year-olds that both start a training program at the same time, you're not going to see this wide range of responses. But if you take two 22-year-olds and put them on the same program, they may respond very, very differently just from a pure genetic profile. But certainly, adequate nutrition is really important. I think with beginning exercisers, there's not this huge need to create this massive caloric surplus to put on muscle mass. But if we have someone that's been, you know, lifting weights for 3 or 4 years and they want to add muscle mass, they may need to push the envelope in terms of just how many calories they're getting in. You know, after that first couple of years, it's hard to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. So you kind of have to pick one and prioritize certain things at time. Sleep is it's a great equalizer across all aspects of life, from, you know, cognition to chronic disease risk, but it impacts how well you perform, certainly how well you recover from whatever exercise intervention you have in place. And, you know, sleep is kind of when we grow those muscles, right? That's when all the nutritional interventions, you know, kind of do their work. And then the last thing is certainly the training stimulus, right? If I go into the weight room and I do like this comprehensive full body, you know, program, and then, you know, Dr. Camp goes in and he just goes on this squat specialization program, like he's probably going to be buying a lot of new pairs of pants because he doesn't, you know, fit his quads into his pant leg anymore. So certainly, like, there are times when something may be more prioritized than others. We do a lot in the rehabilitation realm if a limb has been immobilized and we need to recoup muscle mass after a surgery. But I think those are kind of the big four: sleep, genetics, nutrition, and then the actual training program.
Excellent. It's interesting, sleep and nutrition. It doesn't matter what topic we're talking about here on the Human Optimization Project. When we talk about resiliency and improving your joy and managing emotions, or exercise and like lifting weights and getting stronger. Sleep and nutrition always come up as major factors and major contributors. And so if people out there are looking to get the most bang for their buck, work on those two things. So sleep, nutrition, exercise affects everything. Now, there are different types of strength training in different areas and fields of competition. I think it'd be helpful if we took a moment just to kind of clarify some of the differences between some of these. So I'm thinking about things like bodybuilding versus powerlifting versus general strength training. I think it'd be helpful to highlight that so the audience has a clear idea of what we are talking about and what we're not talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So general strength training, as the name implies, it kind of encompasses all of those, right? Whether you're a power lifter, an Olympic lifter, a bodybuilder, all those would kind of fall underneath this categorization of I'm using some kind of either external implement or my own body weight to produce force in the hopes of getting stronger and or bigger, right? I think bodybuilding, you know, as an actual approach speaks a little bit more to it's generally higher volume. The idea is to grow muscles. You know, there's a symmetry component to it. There's all those different things. You know, there's less of a quest for brute strength. It's more about the aesthetic component and, you know, building muscular size. Powerlifting is actually kind of a poor nomenclature. There's nothing really particularly powerful about powerlifting, but what it speaks to is the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, three competitive lifts. Try to get as brutally strong as you can on those three, and then compete in certain weight classes. The Olympic lifting is, you know, somewhat similar in that, you know, you're competing for certain lifts. The clean and jerk and the snatch are the two lifts. That's what you see on TV in the Olympics. And then, you know, general strength training can also be what you or I do to, you know, support our daily lifestyle, whether it's playing recreational tennis or just being good dads, or, you know, whatever it is that we need to do. So there's all different derivatives, but underneath strength training, you really kind of have to consider what the goal is for different people.
Mhm. And I like how you broke it down earlier, where you talked about, there's sort of the two pathways. One is making muscles bigger, and making them bigger does make them stronger. But then there's also sort of talking about how you use them functionally. And I think each of those different practices or domains will weigh those two things differently. But I think for us and the purpose of our conversation going forward, when we're talking about general strength training just to get better at life, we're really going to be talking about both. We want to get stronger, and we want to use those muscles in a more practical, efficient, and effective way.
I have a good friend who spoke about, he said, it was a Dan John quote. He said, in your 20s, you Olympic lift, in your 30s, you power lift, in your 40s, you bodybuild, and in your 50s, you do whatever doesn't hurt. So what you have to kind of appreciate is all of those are they're kind of selling out for the dream, right? They generally are a little bit more aggressive. These are some of the folks who've got the dinged up cartilage that come into you and want to know what they can do from a sports medicine standpoint to kind of keep living the dream. So we can still have an amazing quality of life without selling out to extremes with some of these things. And you're talking to a guy who competed in powerlifting, so I speak the language, but nowadays it's much more about how it supports my quality of life.
Yeah, that's a great call out there, Eric. In my orthopedic surgery practice, I talk to people all day, every day about saying, well, wait a minute, this such and such a sport or this type of lifting or powerlifting or bodybuilding, it's been my life. What am I going to do? It's like, well, you're going to change your goals. You got to change your focus, and part of it is just figuring out how can I keep playing the game as long as possible. So speaking of playing the game as long as possible, I mentioned earlier on that having increased strength and muscle mass improves longevity and health span for people. It obviously makes you stronger. What are some of the other benefits of gaining muscle and being strong that people may not be aware of?
This is an analogy I use with everybody, from teenage athletes to senior citizens. I had this conversation with my mom. Strength is like a glass. Okay, the bigger you make the glass, the more fluid you can put in it. And what are the fluid? It's the other qualities, right? So it's the foundation to the pyramid. So strength, you got to have force before you can develop force quickly, which is power, right? That's how in your late 70s, prevent a hip fracture when you fall, right? The ability to self-correct really, really quickly. It's also what you would do as a foundation for joint stability, right? So if you're really like hypermobile person who loves participating in yoga and you've got chronic back pain, this might just be enough good stiffness to keep you from, getting to debilitating back pain. So it's certainly the foundation for strength endurance, which might make you, a better marathoner, a better hiker, or just someone that can keep up with your grandkids all day. So certainly there's a ton of improved function for which strength is the foundation. And once you've been at it long enough, you can train all those different qualities. You can throw med balls, like if you care, you can do sprints and kettlebell swings and all these things that happen faster. But I think also what's really powerful is there's some pretty pronounced immune benefits. There's improvements to endocrine function, whether it's the acute hormonal release that takes place after some of these sessions in terms of testosterone and growth hormone, or even just that we get greater receptor content in our muscles so that those hormones actually work more profound. For folks who may be managing blood sugar, other metabolic challenges, certainly there's that side of things. I know for me, I'm a much more pleasant person to be around when I exercise, but lifting has maybe a little bit of a more special place in my heart because it's a good place to blow off some steam and things like that. So I think you get so much in terms of reduced stress and anxiety, but on top of just the normal physiological benefits that, I mean, it's as close to the fountain of youth as you can imagine. And the nice thing about it is it's largely free, right? This isn't an expensive drug that you have to pay a fortune for. It's amazing that sleep and exercise have such profound benefits, but they're actually really, really affordable.
That's a phenomenal list, and I think you hit on a lot of things, some of which were physical, a lot of which are mental or psychological, some of which are energy-based, health-based, so a pretty wide a range of benefits. We're going to shift into our second section where we sort of talk about why we struggle with this. And I think most of the audience is saying, "Well, I know I struggle. This is easy. You can skip this section." I think it's pretty easy to gloss over this, but if we don't sort of understand why we're not doing a good job, it's harder for us to correct it. So we'll take a minute or two just to go through this. Overall, how do you think we're doing as a population when it comes to having appropriate strength? Are we most of us adequately strong, or do we tend to be under muscled as a society?
I'd say we fall short. The one that always is eye-opening for me is if you board a plane, how many people can actually put their luggage in the overhead carry-on? It's always very eye-opening for me how many people struggle with that. And I think it's actually kind of a good indicator of kind of population-wide what we're probably working with. I remember we were talking about, kind of covering this. So when I looked, and there was actually a CDC study that came out back in 2020, and it said that about 24% of US adults actually met the guidelines that were put out in 2018. And those guidelines were 150 to 300 minutes a week of aerobic exercise and 2 days a week of some kind of muscle strengthening activity. So you're talking about a quarter of Americans meet those thresholds. Like, to be honest, 300 minutes a week of aerobic exercise is a lot. I don't know many people that have 5 hours to just like, sit on a bike and do all that. So I think that's probably a little bit bold, but the twice a week strength training to me is not at all, unreasonable. It was interesting. There was another study in 18 that said that 27% of young Americans are too overweight to meet physical military requirements. So when you kind of put those two together, you could actually, say that the number is probably substantially below 24%. So I have my concerns, especially as, the population ages. But what I think masks those challenges is, to some of the stuff we talked about earlier, the longevity community, the biohacking, everybody's really excited about it. So I think the top 20% are probably more fit than they've ever been. And the bottom 20% certainly hasn't changed. And we're trying to impact probably the 60% in the middle to do things a little bit differently.
That's very well said, and I agree with you. You know, the plane luggage analogy is a great one because I think as you start to lose strength, you stop doing things, whether people realize it or not. And then when you stop doing things, bad things happen otherwise. So we have to find ways to continue to be active and move and try not to let our bodies hold us back. So let me ask you a common thing that I hear out there is people will say, "Well, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to get too bulky." What are your and which I usually find very interesting comment. What are your thoughts on that?
There would be a lot more bulky people walking around if it was easy to get bulky. And this is coming from a guy like I competed in weight class sports for a really long time. So I meticulously had, man, it took a lot of really crazy training weights and nutrition, all that to bump up a weight class. So I would just say for most people, it's not a concern, particularly if we're talking about this twice a week frequency. This is what we do with our athletes in season to just maintain what they have. So I think if most people are, working out like this twice a week and they're not eating a crazy caloric surplus, it won't happen. More often than not, what happens is people see body recomposition. They drop 15 pounds of body fat. Maybe they put on 8 to 10 pounds of muscle mass, but they look completely different. Their clothes fit dramatically different, particularly if they're folks who have just done kind of aerobic work for an extended period of time. You will see people who actually gain weight but look leaner just because they've kind of reproportioned themselves, so to speak, with adding a little bit of muscle mass.
Mhm. And I agree with you. I think your risk of becoming too bulky is almost zero. And if something happens and for some reason you do put on too much muscle mass, unfortunately, it's quite easy to get rid of it. So it'll go away pretty quickly. So it's unlikely to be a problem for you, but if it is, it's very easily correctable. So you've been doing this for a long time with a lot of folks of all different ages and ability levels. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when trying to get stronger?
Yeah, I think, there's two ends of the spectrum. And, I hate to generalize, but they tend to be male female mistakes. Having been in like college weight rooms where we've coached male athletes and female athletes, you spend your entire career holding male athletes back because they want to put too much weight on the bar, lift too heavy early on, and just develop bad habits. At the other end of the spectrum, traditionally what happens on the female side is, you have to tell them, put a 2.5 pound plate on, add weight to create that adaptation. So I think it's either, pushing too heavy or not going heavy enough to create the adaptation. I'd say as an extension of that, we are seeing more of a trend in the fitness community to do a lot of high level performance testing early on. Someone goes in for their first day at a facility and they're, hey, let's do a 1 rep max deadlift. And that person, hurts a disc and they're never the same, right? It's something that becomes a repeat injury for the next 5, 10 years. So I always talk really importantly about how it should be steady linear progression. I have twin daughters who are 10, and one of them is like a very dedicated gymnast. So a lot of her gymnastics friends are coming in, her sister's softball friends are coming in. So we're actually training a lot of 10 and 11-year-old females that are just getting into it. And it's so easy to get strong with them. But the biggest thing is like, even if I know we can push them, like, add 2 to 4 kilograms a week, and over the course of a year, you'll be a different person. So it's way more about just creating these steady linear progressions.
Slow and steady. And you mentioned, the person that comes in tries to do the 1 rep max right off the bat and could potentially get injured. Are there any other dangers of weight training that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think very specific populations, right? If you do a rotator cuff repair on somebody and he goes right back to the gym in his sling, like you can create some problems there. Like if you had a detached retina that was repaired, not too long ago, like a lot of pressure like that. So I think people that for whatever reason have some significant contraindication in terms of like high blood pressure or something like that, like certainly check with your doctor, make sure you're in a good place. But my experience has been over the course of my career is just intelligent training done well, especially with a qualified professional. Like we can find a way to get a training effect for absolutely anybody.
hmm And what I'm hearing you say, we'll talk about this in the third section, but I'm hearing you say now that it's really going to be slow, intentional, consistent, steady progress is what we're going for. This is not flashy, super hot and, you know, just coming out of the gun, guns blazing sort of approach to things, right? And sometimes it can feel that's boring to people. They don't want that. They want the instant fix, which I think can be a concern. So, how do you counsel athletes that you see come in wanting the quick gains? They want to take the shortcuts. How do you counsel them through that?
So the first thing I'll say is what we're not trying to do is just get likes on Instagram by doing weird things, right? I'd actually much rather have an athlete that has a bunch of like 6 out of 10 training sessions over the course of 3 years versus the guy that went viral his first week and then missed 6 months with a back injury. So what I often talk about is that the training itself doesn't have to be crazy novel. What we need to do is we need to create a novel experience, right? Motivating music, cool training partners, people that will bust your chops if you no show, like that, and pure objective data that shows, hey, this is working. Let's reaffirm this. And what helps for me too is, our facility, if a 14-year-old kid comes in here to start working out, he's convinced he has the right way in his mind, I can walk across the room and grab a big leaguer and say, this is a guy that did it right for the last 10 years, and he's throwing 95 miles an hour and healthy in the big league. So like having those poster boys, so to speak, of success are really important. So that's why it's always good to be in a good community. It's hard to work out on your own at home. Like, and I understand that's the hand that some people have been dealt just from a schedule complexity standpoint, but that's where having just that novel training environment that's very motivating, I think can really make a difference for people.
So you can find ways to make it fun and fancy and flashy without doing things that are dangerous with the weights. Okay, great. So now let's jump into this third section. This is really where I want to spend the most of the time because we're going to try to come up with some core practices or principles that everyone should really incorporate. So I feel like there's so much information out there that it's really challenging to make sense all of it, and everybody seems to have the answer. It's either low weight, high reps, heavy weight, low reps, go until failure, but not too far, you'll get hurt. Don't do total body lifts. I isolate each group. No, you should be doing total body lifts, and you need to hit each muscle once a week. No, 3 times per week. You got to rest 30 seconds after a set, 2 minutes after a set, and it's all over the place. So how do you counsel people in the sea of misinformation? Maybe we just start there. How do you counsel people to sift through that?
Yeah, there's a lot there, so it's tricky to even almost know where to start. What I'll tell you is, I think, for a long time, the training community has been probably most heavily influenced by the bodybuilding community, for better or worse, right? They've made some great nutritional, kind of recommendations that have helped people over the years, and they certainly, they made people enthusiastic about training. I think for the average person who's strapped for time and is looking for something that provides a lot of training economy, meaning they can get great results in a limited amount of time, most of those people are going to do well with full body workouts, right? So instead of having like a back and biceps day and a chest and triceps day, train full body, 3 days a week on non-consecutive days. So maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I think those setups for the typical person that's listening to this podcast are going to be great, right? And you're going to work on not just these single joint movements, but a lot of compound exercises, meaning things like deadlifts and squats and lunges and rows and various presses. They're involving multiple joints with each, movement. What's also nice about this is after you get past this initial stage, these are also the patterns that you can load a little bit more, right? And when you load a little bit more, you involve more joints, there's probably a greater endocrine response, right? The benefits tend to be more far reaching, right? You deplete muscle glycogen a lot more. You're stimulating, a greater physiological response. But I think just as importantly to what we talked about earlier is the functional carryover to the real world is better, right? Doing a bunch of biceps curls, like it's great if you want bigger biceps, by all means, tack it on the end of your workout if you like that. It's probably not the thing that's going to really deliver these huge benefits from a functional capacity standpoint when you're in your 80s and you want to stay active. So I always talk more about like trying to put yourself in positions that athletes would get into, like things that they
Yeah,
might encounter in their sports, and we need to make them successful with those.
perfect. So why don't we do this? Let's start really simple, and then we'll kind of build up the complexity here. So maybe not that this is how we want to approach it, but let's say just pick a muscle, any muscle on the body, and if I want that muscle to get stronger. So let's just talk about it individually, and then we'll go into how you can actually build that into a practical routine and total body lifts and all that coming up. But let's just say, just pick a muscle on the body, and I say I want to get that muscle stronger. Roughly, how many times do I need to lift that muscle a week? How many sets should I be doing? How hard should those sets be doing? What are my rep goals? Like basic, just for a single muscle over the course of a week.
Yeah, for sure. What I would tell you is first off, excessive volume is not necessarily more advantageous, right? Don't think you need, 8 sets of 10 or anything like that. There's research that shows as little as 1 set can make a difference, but you are going to see discernible benefits from doing a little bit more. So I would say 2 to 3 sets, 3 times a week makes a huge difference. You can still make progress with two. In terms of actual rep schemes, there's probably not a whole lot of benefit for the overwhelming majority of the population, outside of college football players or competitive powerlifters who want to squat 600 pounds. Most people probably are fine with sets of 5 to 12. I mean, maybe early on they're on the higher end. And as you get more and more experienced, you could do some sets that are a little bit lower, obviously heavier weight with lower reps, but also we'll do, lighter weight for sets of 5 because we want it to be technically really, really good early on with our athletes. So it could go in a lot of different directions. I know one other thing you asked about was like, is it important to train to failure? I think you can leave a couple of reps in the tank, right? So let's say you do a set of 8, maybe pick a weight that you feel like you could have done 10 or 11 times. So you stop short of technical failure. And we do that because we don't want to, create negative, behaviors, negative, or I should say negative technique modifications where, somebody slips into bad patterns that could potentially hurt them. Because again, bad positions do get magnified when you put load on them. So you just want to be mindful of always ingraining good techniques when you do this.
Okay, that's extremely helpful, actually. So I started off this section with all of these different questions about, misinformation and things that seem contradictory. Ultimately, I would say in certain scenarios, really all of that information might be true. And I think that people need to recognize you don't have to answer all of those questions. Those are all just different tools to put in the toolbox. Maybe there's a time in your life where you'll want to change it up and do it that way. But what you just gave us there is sort of the basic core components that somebody needs to make a muscle stronger. So you said roughly 3 sets, 2 times a week. So roughly 6 sets over the course of the week. Each set somewhere in the 5 to 12 rep range. And each of those sets should be challenging, where those last few are difficult, but you can still finish them. So you're not going all the way to failure. Maybe you stop 1 to 2 reps shy of failure. So I think if people can, is that fair? A fair
I think that's
summary?
great. And then probably the only other thing we didn't talk about that was it's probably the most important acute program variable is exercise selection. Pick
Mhm.
exercises that don't hurt, right? Like
Yeah.
I generally prefer, free weights, cables, things that require you to balance, to move in space, things like that, versus just doing machines, particularly if we're only working out twice a week. So, make sure that these are pain-free things that challenge you to be at least a little bit athletic. And then just remember that these recommendations, the longer you've been at it, the more they need to be adjusted, right? Like two
Yes.
days a week might not be enough to continue gaining strength, after a couple of years of working out, but you may have gotten the benefits that you need to go support your tennis career or, your aerobic fitness, components or all that stuff. So just understand that these are always moving targets based on what your goals are.
Okay, so that's great. So we have a good foundation that people understand. Okay, this is about how much I should work a muscle in order to see some gains. Now let's put that into kind of some practical terms of how they can actually do that. So I heard you say that it's probably best to lift on a muscle group more than 1 time a week if you can. So divide that up over 2 to 3 sessions over the course of the week. So let's say we'll ignore the cardio component for now. We're going to ignore mobility and stretching and balance. Those are all important. They should be a part of any exercise routine. We've talked about that previously on here, and we're going to have future sessions dedicated to just cardio, VO2 max, balance, proprioception, etc. So we're going to assume everybody is doing some of that. Let's talk about just the strength training part. And let me say I've got a total, I can do 3 strength training sessions a week, 30 minutes. So I've got an hour. Actually, I'll just say I have an hour and a half total in a week that I can dedicate to my strength training. First question is that going to be enough for me to see some improvement? And then second, how would you split that up for me? Hour and a half over a week.
Yeah, I think you have probably two options, right? You could try two 45-minute sessions or three 30-minute sessions, right? The
Okay.
three 30 minutes are probably easy for the folks that just walk down to their home gym in the basement and bang it out there. The two 45s are probably more appropriate for someone that has to, travel somewhere to do their workouts or something to that effect. Or, like you talked about, these may be paired with something else. Maybe they're also doing some cardiovascular activity. Maybe it comes after a sport practice where they, play two sets of tennis and go in and do a little bit of strength training afterwards. So there's different ways to approach it. I'm probably breaking it up, if possible, into the three sessions. I like the idea of frequent exposures if I have access to them. I think that goes a really long way, particularly because to what you just referred to, they usually have to go through a pretty thorough warm up before they start this, right? So I'm going to get some, some mobility benefits on the front end. So I always start with a good dynamic warm up, get your body temperature up, expose yourself to some new ranges of motion. But for me, how I might structure a session like that, we're probably going to start off with some kind of comprehensive exercise like a squat or a hinge, right? So maybe it's a kettlebell sumo deadlift, or it's a trap bar deadlift, or it's a front squat or something to that effect, depending on the person I have in front of me.
And let me just clarify too for the listener, by hinge, you're talking about a hip hinge movement, which is going to involve both legs, back, core. So you're going to be hitting multiple things when you do this. And some common examples of hinge type movements that you just mentioned, the deadlifts, squats, being some of the more common ones. Okay, good.
Put force into the ground, which is how we
Yep.
propel ourselves, how we change direction, do all those things. And with something like that, I could pair that very easily with an upper body push, right? It's not a competing superset where I might not do a barbell bench press, but maybe I do a standing cable press, or I do a push-up variation or something to that effect. Because those things pair really well together. I go back and forth, three sets on each, and it makes the most of my time instead of me just standing around looking at an Instagram between sets, right?
Right.
Um, so that we'll do a lot of supersets where it might be A1, A2, you go back and forth between the two, finish that pairing, and then move on to the next one. So for a second one, maybe we do some kind of a pull, like a one-arm cable row, or a chin up or a lat pull down or something to that effect. And I'd pair that up with some kind of a single leg exercise, a split squat, a lunge, a step up. Again, something that's not necessarily competing. And I could do that a lot of different ways. I could do it with a barbell. I could do it with a kettlebell. I could do it with dumbbells. There's a lot of different ways to kind of program something like that. And again, single leg exercise, right? Your hips, your knees, your ankles are all working. Your core control is, kind of under attack from that exercise because you're trying to not tip over. So there's a lot of variables there as well. And we've handled both our push and our pull and our upper body. And I generally like for a last pairing, if we were doing three, I might do some kind of a core control exercise. Maybe that's like a stability ball rollout or some kind of like a chop or a lift on the cable to teach people how to rotate. And then we have the options. Like we could do, some kind of like a posterior chain exercise, like a hip thrust, or some kind of like glider leg curl if we wanted to work on our, our butt and our hamstrings a little bit more. Or maybe it's someone who's got a history of shoulder pain and we mix in a little, external rotation work just to strengthen their rotator cuff. So you always have options to add and subtract. And like, if you find you're at 25 minutes and you want to mix in some biceps, tricep stuff, by all means have at it. But I think you should always remember it's kind of like it's like setting up a meal. You have your meat and potatoes, your vegetables that fills up the plate. If you have time left over for dessert, that is what it is. But you always want to start and build around some of these multi-joint exercises.
Good. So, would you do similar sessions? So, let's say we're going to make that, our first 30-minute session of the day. Are you saying we would do all that in 30 minutes, and then will we do the same thing on the other 2 days?
Yeah, if you really think about it, especially because you're pairing back and forth, right? So we just outlined, call it 6 exercises, 3 sets each. If we took a minute to execute each one of them, that's 18 minutes, right? There's going to
Hmm.
be just the setup, the grab a drink of water, move around. But the nice thing about doing supersets is while one area is resting, another area is working. So, it'll also
Right.
give you some aerobic benefits. Your heart rate's going to stay elevated, but not have it interfere with your technique. So you should be able to work through all those. And then, you have variety, right? So if you did like a deadlift variation on Monday, and you're going to do a session on Wednesday, maybe you do your squat variation first. And if you did a split squat, maybe you do a reverse lunge instead. So, this concept of variation without change, these are the things that help us over the course of time where, we understand the patterns, but we get just enough variety that it probably gives us better carryover to what we encounter in the real world. So it's just enough to keep it, novel and fresh, so it's not super boring either.
Perfect. So just to kind of summarize that as a baseline for people to start, we said you get roughly 30 minutes 3 times a week, so that's an hour and a half. Take time to warm up, but then in doing that, do supersets where you're actually doing two different workouts that work different parts of your body. So you do the first set of one, and then the first set of the other one, second set of the first one, and then second set of the second one. Go for 3 sets, and then you switch it up. And if you do that 3 times, you're going to get 6 lifts in and get a good total body workout in 20 to 30 minutes. And then that can be repeated 3 times a week, or you can do slight variations on each, and then build in a little time at the end for some of the fun stuff or other things that you want to focus on and work on.
Problem with having some redundancy, especially early on. It's like anything else. When you rode a bike, right? You didn't ride a bike Monday, go play tennis Tuesday, play volleyball Wednesday. Like, you rode that bike several times a week to kind of grade it. Strength training is kind of the same. So if you need to stick with the same exercises for the first month or so, like, that's how you're rewiring those patterns: brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, recruiting those muscles. So there is something to be said about getting good at a block of, 6 or 8 exercises, and then gradually expanding your horizons a little bit. So it's okay to be a little bit redundant early on.
Yeah, and these exercises you're talking about too, where I'm doing these hinge things with a squat or a deadlift or some sort of single leg thing, you're working multiple muscle groups too. So that's going to work on some of that patterning that you mentioned earlier on, and that's going to make that strength more practical for my life and more functional rather than if I'm just working on a single muscle group in isolation trying to make it bigger. So this allows you to work not only on the muscle mass but also sort of the neuro patterning that will make that muscle more functional for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you can always find examples of how it matter for different, right? You're a surgeon. We know surgeons have lots of neck pain and lots of shoulder pain. Why? Because they get put in terrible positions. But you're probably in a very different position for a shoulder surgery than you are for an elbow surgery than you are for a knee surgery. You have to have variety in your life. So I think it's important for us to build it into our training. And it's a little bit of a leap of faith to assume that it's always going to carry over, because life throws unpredictable moments at us. But I think if we can have a very comprehensive, kind of a rich proprioceptive environment in our training, it does give us a better chance, a better fighting chance of surviving life here.
Okay. And you talked about the value in having some repetitiveness in this and doing some of the same exercises different times in the week because your body starts to learn that patterning. I want to ask you how long. So two questions about how long. My first question is how long before I start seeing some benefits and changes? And then my second how long question is how long before I need to switch up my routine and change it?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is the strength will come around very quickly. Early on, just you're getting better at recruiting certain muscles, and you're getting better at practicing extras. No different if you were learning how to serve in tennis. It's going to be better with each successive lesson. I think the muscle mass comes a little bit later, and it's gonna be dependent a lot more on, if you're a 17-year-old kid, you're going to put muscle mass on really quickly when you go to the gym. It's going to be 4 or 8 weeks. You're going to start to notice it. It might take a little bit longer if you're someone that's, into your 60s and, just getting going with it. So just be patient with it, but always hang your hat on it. The strength is improving and I'm moving better. The muscle mass portion will take care of itself if I'm eating right, sleeping, all that stuff. With respect to how long to stay on a program, there is a personal preference to it. I would say at our facilities, we redesign thing every 4 weeks. We don't overhaul the entire program, but we change probably 80 or 90% of it. Just more out of just variety and keeping things fun, and giving them exposure so they have a few weeks to see the improvements in strength and, feel the benefits of doing certain things. And then we kind of shuffle it up just before it gets stale. We don't want to get to that point. We want to head it off early on in a training program. You might run the same program for 10 or 12 weeks just because
Mhm.
you're going to get so much better out over that time. And then you change it up. And the nice thing about it is you can, like we said, do variation without change. Maybe, you're doing a dumbbell goblet split squat, and then you just do it with your arms at your side, or you do it with a barbell on your back or a barbell on your front squat grip. There's all these different ways you can add different implements just to give you a little novelty to keep you engaged.
Great. And you mentioned too that you tend to change it up more for your seasoned weightlifters and strength trainers. Rather early on, it's probably best to stick with it for a little, maybe that 10 to 12 weeks early on. Then once you establish that foundation, then you may be able to change it up a little bit more frequently.
Most important thing is showing up. I mean, that's true of everything in life, but I would rather have you do the same workout program for 15 years without changing than not showing up. Because even if you're not like broadening your functional capacity, you're still going to get bone density benefits. You're still going to preserve muscle mass. You're still going to get a lot of benefits. It's going to improve your blood sugar, all these different things. So just keep showing up, even if it, is stuff that maybe you're comfortable with and you're not really getting outside of your normal horizons with it.
Great. One last question for you. We're going to have a dedicated session coming up on protein, dietary protein, and how much people should be eating. A lot of different schools of thought on this. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit different if you're a bodybuilder or somebody who's doing that. But for the average person out there who's just trying to get stronger and live a long, healthy life, how much dietary protein do you generally recommend for them in a day?
Yeah, I think a safe rule of thumb for athletes is a pound per pound of body weight, or excuse me, a gram per pound of body weight. So in other words, if you're a 165-pound athlete, 165 grams is probably a good thing to shoot for. I say that because I know a lot of athletes come short on this, and
Mhm.
so it's something where we overshoot. There is research that shows that athletes do need more and that resistance training
Right.
does increase. If you look at the recommended daily allowance, it's well below that. I talk a lot about this concept of protein prejudice. Like I think we fail to realize how many really favorable things it does. It has a high thermic effect of food. You're less likely to get overweight eating extra protein than you are consuming more fat and more carbohydrates. So I tend to err on the side of caution and recommend a little bit higher, knowing that we don't really have any concrete evidence to suggest that too much protein is a problem. That said, do you need to eat 800 grams of protein a day? No, that's not productive. You're better off getting, a good balance of protein, carbs, and fat to support rebuilding, but energy levels and stuff. So I think for most athletes, if you're at a gram per pound, you're in a good spot. That said, sedentary populations, those outside that realm can certainly get away with considerably less than that. But again, I'm more about optimization than I am about just minimization.
Perfect. And we may not all be athletes, but hopefully we're aspiring to be athletes at heart at least, and we're moving in that direction too. So I think generally, for the most part, a lot of us are underdoing it on the protein. But the more active you are, the stronger you are, the more you need, probably up to that max. Not more than 1 gram per pound of body weight, but approaching that as you get more active and lifting more.
Course is an important consideration there too. Like, is it coming from complete protein sources? Are you
Mhm.
vegetarian? Are you not? Like, so there's a lot of variables to it. It's something you should have a conversation with a good dietitian about, and I'm sure they can help you work through it.
Great. So this has been an excellent discussion, Eric, and I appreciate you taking us through all of this and letting us learn from you. I've been taking notes as we've been talking, so I'd like to summarize my notes here at the end, at least what I've picked up from you. So first, you define strength as really the ability to produce force. It's often skill specific, so we have to think about how we want to apply it in our life in order for it to really be meaningful. You talked about two pathways that we have to consider. One, a bigger muscle is generally stronger, which is important. But in addition to that, we need to optimize sort of the neurologic patterning and how those muscles fire and teach it how to be functional and synchronize and work with all of our others. We talked about the factors that impact our ability to gain muscle and strength, with the big four being our genetics, our nutrition, our sleep, and the training stimulus, which is what we focused on for the rest of it. The benefits of getting stronger are pretty vast. So, increased longevity, improve force and power production, improve balance and stability, decrease pain and injury, increased endurance, improving your metabolism, improving your immune system and health, increasing your energy, and also helping with mood, depression, anxiety, and stress. Unfortunately, only about 24% of U.S. adults get the general recommended guidelines for exercise. So, we fall short on this. We need to do a better job. Some common mistakes. Oftentimes, not always, but men often try to do too much and they have bad habits, poor form. Females often not enough. So make sure that you're pushing yourself appropriately. And then another common mistake is that we don't do a consistent, steady progression. We try to do this in big leaps and bounds when in reality it's intentional, consistent effort that does it. If you want to increase the strength of a single muscle, you probably need to hit it for at least 3 sets per week that are 5 to 12 reps per set, and those reps should be challenging. Not that you go to the point of failure, but you go to the point where you could only maybe do one or two more before you stop. You gave us a great construct of how we could approach this. So 3 30-minute sessions a week in those, doing multiple different compound lifts, which is really helpful. Definitely okay to do these total body lifts and compound lifts. They're more efficient for you, and they'll help with that neuropatterning. So go back and check through that section to get all the details on that. So that's my summary, which is incredibly helpful to me. So you made me think about several things in a different way. Now I want to give you a chance to summarize by re-answering our 3 big questions. So you've done it over the last 45 minutes, but here's a chance to give kind of the rapid fire answers. So Eric, what is meant by strength training, and why is it so important for us?
It's any initiative that we use to try to develop the ability to produce more force. And strength is foundational to, a wide variety of activities, from stability to power to muscular endurance. And those are the things that allow us to safely attack what life throws at us.
Great. Our second big question, why do so many of us struggle to work out regularly and gain muscle?
Strength training can be hard. It requires progressive overload. You've got to keep showing up over an extended period of time, and you have to be a little bit stronger, each time that you show up to the gym. So it's great. There's an objective component to it, but it also is more challenging than just doing aerobic exercise where it's just show up and meet a heart rate for a period.
Good. And our third one, what are the core practices that everyone should incorporate to build muscle and get stronger?
I think 2 to 3 days a week in terms of frequency, 2 to 3 sets per exercise, 6 to 8 exercises per session. Take it a couple reps short of technical failure in the 5 to 12 rep range, and good things will happen.
Excellent. So we always like to end these with a challenge or a call to action. And you laid out a nice plan. Honestly, I mean, you gave us something that we can focus on for the next 12 weeks or 3 months. So there's a ton of action that should come out of this session for our listeners. But before you conquer the 12-week plan, I want to start at the very beginning. So I want our listeners to think about how, we talked earlier on, Eric told us that strength training, you make the muscles bigger to make them stronger, but you're also working on your neural patterning to improve the communication of the muscles and balance them so that you can then do the functional things that you want to do in your life. So before you sort of design your strength training program and decide what you are going to work on, you need to figure out why you're doing it. What are your goals in life? You're not just going to adopt the workout program of some bodybuilder if you're not a bodybuilder. Think about what your life is and think about what your goals are. Are you trying to play pickleball with your friends? Are you trying to keep up with your kids and throw them batting practice? Or are you trying to compete in triathlons? Whatever it is, figure that out first, and then use that to inform your strength training program. And I would encourage you, that's step 1. Step 2, sit down and write it out, and then try to find at least an hour to an hour and a half a week that you can dedicate to strength training. So that's our summary. So Eric, this has been a great discussion. The title of our session was How to Build Muscle and Get Stronger, What Everyone Needs to Know and Do. And I'm going to emphasize that word do. Having this knowledge is good, but if you don't go out and actually do it, it doesn't really help you. So I would encourage, hopefully you're inspired by this and you'll get out there and put some of this into action. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated having you.
My pleasure. This was fun. Great questions, and I enjoyed being here.
Good. And to our audience, remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world, and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.